select one of 3 films, and then I'm transported far away. I'm in a field full of chickens, and the farmer is talking to me and explaining what's going on his farm. And as I look around, I can see the whole scene. It's an astonishing experience. From one farm to another. Where I'm actually standing is on a mixed farm in Oxfordshire, although that feels somewhat incidental because at no point do I go more than a few steps into its main driveway. There is a large truck from which some very new technologies are being demonstrated. All this is part of a new set of experiences developed by a group of organisations, from Harper Adams University to Arla Foods to the Agriculture and Horticultural Development Board, and led by McDonald's UK, with a stated aim of using technology, particularly virtual reality or VR, to bring an experience of farming and food production into new places in new ways. Conor McVeigh is the supply chain director of McDonald's UK.
There is a serious note to this, over and above the fun aspect. We do need to encourage new recruits into the industry. Food and farming are big employers in the UK, and it employs currently 1 in 8 members of the general public. We know that there is a skills gap within farming and the food industry. We know from a careers advice perspective that over 80% of people who are looking at a career aren't getting advice around food and farming.
And so to the main experience using an Oculus Rift VR headset, and it's all about potato harvesting. Sam Watts led the team that developed this.
It fools you completely through your eyes and through your brain and your ears that you are immersed and present in this world, in this case, in the cabin of a tractor harvesting potatoes. Some people find it a little bit overwhelming, just having their visual and their oral senses taken over, essentially.
Okay, position the trailer over to my right, under the animator.
That is a very strange sensation. I am now in a tractor cab, and as I move the real wheel in front of me, the virtual wheel below me with the virtual right hand moves accurately and in sync with my own movements.
Be careful, you might bruise the potatoes.
And I'm driving over more crop. That was astonishing. And what also came across is this is not easy to do.
No.
In real life or in virtual life. And I think this is my cue to stop before I do any more damage.
Rich Ward, better off in the virtual world than the real one, I suspect. Now, farmers' understandable obsession with the weather is heightened at this time of year as they keep an eye out for emerging pests. From slugs to insects, pests can cause serious damage to crops. Well, we've been discussing ways of controlling them this week, but might the best approach be to look at the pests themselves? For more than a decade now, the UK research and biotechnology company Oxitec has been genetically manipulating insects with the aim of developing environmentally friendly ways of combating them. Well, our reporter Andrew Dawes met Dr. Neil Morrison and one of the species they're working on, Drosophila suzuki, commonly known as the fruit fly.
So inside the pot are the male and female flies flying around and also a substance on which they like to lay eggs. So this pest is actually a devastating pest of soft fruit around the world, including the UK. It originates in Japan and in the past few years has spread to many parts of the world, North America, where it causes a lot of problems with soft fruit, and in 2008 it first arrived in Spain and is now in the UK.
Can you just explain what's happening in this pod? What actually are you trying to do in terms of research here?
Essentially, we generate genetically modified flies. So we insert a gene which we call a self-limiting gene, and when we have a strain of the fly carrying these genes, the plan will be to release males of this fly into the field, which will go and find female pest flies, mate with them, and because our males carry the genes, all of the offspring of these males will not survive to adulthood, and the effect is a population crash. And we've done that with the dengue fever Zika virus mosquito in Brazil, and the effect is extremely powerful population suppression on your target pest. And because it relies on mating between a male and a female, the great thing is there's very little off-target effects.
How is that different to a lot of techniques around the world using sterile insect technology, where they irradiate insects to make them sterile?
So our approach relies on 2 genes. So we insert a marker gene so we can track and trace the insects in the field, but also a self-limiting gene which prevents offspring of our males from surviving to adulthood. The conventional sterile insect technique is different in that insects are sterilized by exposure to radiation, which induces mutations
You mentioned there you were adding a gene to the male fly. And where has that DNA come from?
We make that gene in the lab using just standard molecular biology techniques. And when we have our purified amount of DNA, we collect young eggs and we inject a tiny amount of DNA into each egg. After hatching, those eggs are reared to adulthood.
I mean, a lot of people are worried about GM crops, GM in the environment. I mean, how safe is the work you're doing?
There was a recent review of genetically modified insects by the House of Lords Science and Technology Committee, and their conclusion was overwhelmingly positive about what we do and the potential benefits that our approaches can have on human health and food. And really their recommendation was that the UK government should be supporting this sort of approach and also potentially testing some of this technology in the UK. Insects are becoming resistant to insecticides, and also there's a lot of pressure on farmers to use less insecticides, and so in many parts of the world they're being left without either effective or allowed ways of controlling a pest.
Do you, as a company, envisage a time whereby the insects you're releasing into the environment can almost eradicate the use of any insecticides or pesticides?
I think our method alone is by no means a silver bullet, but certainly as part of an effective integrated pest management plan of action, it could be really effective at reducing pest numbers to very low levels. And I know some farming systems, for example in Europe, have striven to achieve a zero insecticide use approach, and perhaps other approaches like ours will help to kind of broaden that around the world.
Dr. Neil Morrison there on the prospects for genetically modified insects. It's been a bad week for dairy farmers. The price they're paid for milk is now at a 7-year low, and more cuts have been announced, which will take effect over the next few weeks. Well, at this time of year, a price drop isn't unusual because of what's called the spring flush, when cows produce more after being turned out onto grass, putting more milk on the market. But many farmers are now being paid significantly less for a litre of milk than it costs them to produce it. Well, last autumn, we spent a week on a Gloucestershire dairy farm run by husband and wife team Andrew and Hannah Cousins. So I spoke to Andrew and asked how they're coping.
As of this month, we're on just over 20p a litre.
And how does that compare with how much it's costing you to produce? I mean, how much are you losing per litre?
Around about 4 or 5p a litre at current costs. But, so it doesn't sound a lot, but if you multiply that up by 2 million litres that we produce a year, it becomes a sizable chunk of money.
So what do you do?
What do we do? Well, you've got to take the rough with the smooth. We've done our budgets forward. We know we're going to lose money this year, but we're working on the premise of the milk price or the returns from milk improving towards the year end or early next year. If that doesn't happen, we'll have to get out. That's all there is to it.
But for the moment, you're investing for the future.
Yeah, farmers' long-term job. Our short term is 3 years. It takes 3 years before a calf hits the ground, before that calf starts producing milk. We work and we live on the job. There's our lifetime work in there building a herd up. It's not something you give up lightly. And it all depends on individuals' circumstances, whether they're prepared to go on with it or say, no, I've had enough and throw the towel in. But then you've got to turn around and find something else. This particular farm, we're either a full-time dairy farm or we're a part-time, anything else, and we would have to go off farm to, find employment.
Andrew Cousins in Gloucestershire there. Well, industry experts and farmers met yesterday in Northern Ireland to discuss how they can manage this volatility. BBC Northern Ireland's agriculture reporter Elaine Mitchell went along.
Would you like to hear coffee?
As the farmers, the processors and the bankers mingled over a welcoming cup of tea, there was only one topic on the table.
I would very much like to see milk prices rise sooner rather than later.